and welcome to the third in the series of informational presentations on the Brisbane Baylands DEIR. So this is an informational presentation only. Our consultant, the EIR's consultant, is going to provide an overview of the presentation. And tonight it will be on utilities, water supply, public services, recreation, energy and aesthetics, historic resources, traffic air quality, greenhouse gas, and noise. No, that was last week, sorry. Okay, so it'll be utilities, water supply, public services, recreation, energy, aesthetics, and historic resources. So it's, again, this is for an informational series on how to read the draft DEIR. Written comments and comments will be on the EIR, should be submitted October 8th, 2013, and there will be some meetings set up in September to accept public testimony. And we look forward to hearing everyone at that time. The format for tonight, again, is at least 1 hour from Lloyd Zola about the EIR, and then questions for 20 minutes or so. So again, with that, I'd like to introduce Lloyd Zola of ESA.
You're making me carry this around now because I'm making other people carry it around, so I'm now being forced to bear the weight of what I've done. Can we turn the lights down a little bit? And then for people viewing on television, if you're having difficulty seeing this, the presentation, the PowerPoint is on the website, so you can follow it that way. Audio on the TV, and then follow the PowerPoint on the computer. So just want to run through some of the basics. I know we have a couple people here who are new, and we'll do this really quick. The impact analyses all follow this format. Existing setting, which is the baseline, the regulatory setting, which are the basic rules, the significance criteria, the basis for how did we determine whether there's a significant impact, then we describe the impact, a summary of the significance of the impact, conclusions before mitigation, mitigation, conclusions after mitigation. The basic project consists of land development and a series of other things. So when we talk about scenarios or concept plan scenarios, there are 4 different scenarios analyzed at an equal level of detail. There is a proposed amendment to the general plan to make these scenarios and the proposed development consistent with the general plan. That's part of what's being proposed. A specific plan proposed by UPC, the major landowner, for the non-recology portion of the site, and that's only for, not surprisingly, the developer-sponsored plan is sponsored by the developer. That is their project, those 2 scenarios. We're looking, including relocation of the lumber yard, and in one of the scenarios, the expansion of the recology site. There's also, as we'll talk about tonight, a water supply agreement as well as an on-site facility. The 4 scenarios include the developer-sponsored plan. The key here is this includes residential development, the 2 developer-sponsored scenarios, a little over 4,400 dwelling units, and about 12 million square feet of area, of building area, open space, and the lagoon. The second scenario takes that first one, same number of dwelling units, just about the same non-residential area, but includes a sports arena, concert hall, and some additional conference and hotel facilities. The community prepared plan was what you as a community did back a couple years ago. These 2 scenarios do not include residential use and include substantially less building area. In the first one, about 7.7 million square feet, and substantially more open space than the developer's plan. And the final scenario is the recology expansion, which would take the existing recology facility, expand it to about 1 million square feet of area, and the rest of the community prepared plan would stay about the same. So we're going to focus first on utilities and water supply. The key issues addressed, and this is section I knew I was going to go right past that. Section 4.0. In the utilities section, what we're looking at are the basic infrastructure items that support land development. So we're looking at water supply and water facilities, wastewater facilities, and stormwater drainage, water sewer drainage. The basic criteria used to determine is there a significant impact is there existing water supply from existing entitlements and resources, and existing is somewhat of a broad term, for new and expanded development, or are we relying on somebody's going to go find water later? What is the adequacy of wastewater treatment capacity? If there's adequate capacity, less than significant. Is there a need for new facilities, the construction of those facilities causing a significant impact? Would the project exceed the discharge requirements of the regional board, basically looking at sewage and the outflow from a treatment plant? Adequacy of landfill capacity. Is there adequate landfill capacity for project site development? And compliance with state law regarding solid waste. And what we find and what you'll see as you read section 4.0 is that the impacts are largely less than significant based on those criteria. But in two cases, there are significant impacts. One is in relation to water storage. The water in the water supply agreement is not going to come in the same amount every day, and water usage does not follow the same pattern, equal every day, equal every hour throughout a day. So what's required to make a water system work is storage capacity. And right now, the city does not have adequate storage capacity to support development of the Baylands. So new capacity would be required, and that's one of the mitigation measures, is a provision of water storage. As well as, and we'll talk about the impacts of the water supply agreement and some of the effects it has as water travels to the city. So the basic water supply agreement, and there is a chart in the EIR that you can follow fairly simply, how water is transferred, not the physical water, but legal ownership of water is transferred from Oakdale Irrigation District to Modesto Irrigation District to San Francisco PUC to the city of Brisbane. And all that is done with no new facilities. So it's a 50-year agreement. And what you will see in the document is state law requires looking at water supply for a 20-year period. And there is a water supply assessment that analyzes wet years, dry years, multiple years of drought, and a demonstration that with this water supply agreement, as well as, and we'll talk about the on-site wastewater, on-site recycled water plant, there would be adequate water for build out of the Baylands with additional water for the balance of the city. 2,000 acre feet, 1 acre of land, 1 foot deep, about, I can never remember this, 300 something thousand gallons. 400 acre feet per year reserved for the city for the build out of things like Sierra Point. And the key is no new facilities. So all the water that would flow to the city for the Baylands, all 2,400 acre feet, would flow through existing facilities. Now all that does not occur even though there's no facilities built with no impacts. So even though there's existing facilities and no new ones, there's a few things that were analyzed. One is Oakdale Irrigation District, as it takes water out of the Stanislaus River, so that's where all this system starts, has been taking water out of the Stanislaus River historically. They've been taking over a period of years about 41,000 acre feet, so nearly 20 times the amount of water that we're talking about. And the 2,400 acre feet is far smaller than what has essentially the baseline.
What does it say Tuolumne River?
We'll get to the Tuolumne. Okay. What happens is the original water that Oakdale Irrigation takes out of the Stanislaus River, they transfer a water right to Modesto Irrigation District. That's why I follow that little chart, and you'll see that in the EIR. So that Modesto Irrigation District then owns the water. They transfer that water to SFPUC. That water comes physically through Hatch Hatchie Reservoir on the Tuolumne River. And so part of the issue, and one of the impacts is, it's really along the Tuolumne River and Hatch Hatchie Reservoir where physical water flows differently than it would flow without the water supply agreement. So as you'll see in the document, the additional 2,400 acre-feet coming through the reservoir means a slightly different release pattern out of that reservoir. There's a lot of water coming out of that reservoir, slightly different, and that could affect some of the meadows along the Tuolumne River. So even though the agreement starts on the Stanislaus, the physical water that you will get here will come from the Tuolumne. SFPUC, in analyzing their system and movement of water from Hatch Hatchie, did a water program, looked at the releases, determined that there was a significant impact in relation to releases from Hatch Hatchie Reservoir on the meadows along the Tuolumne River, identified and then came out with a mitigation program to mitigate those impacts. The 2,400 acre-feet that are included in this water supply agreement would be part of the mitigation measure implemented by the SFPUC as part of their system. So you will see that impact, and you will see that mitigation program coming through SFPUC. Then in terms of, we'll take questions at the end. There is also an on-site recycled water plant. And that I remember I had mentioned when we talked about the project description, so that water will be recycled on site, becomes part of the project water supply. So the project water supply consists of the water supply agreement, 2,000 acre-feet to the Baylands, reduced by reuse of water through a recycled water plant. That recycled water plant would occur likely late in the program because it takes a certain amount of wastewater to get that plant to function. And so we're estimating maybe 15 years out of a 20-year build-out until the recycled water plant is in place. And so as you read section 4.0, you will see two water savings programs. One is called Savings Program D, which is what would occur before the wastewater treatment, the on-site, I keep calling it wastewater treatment plant, the on-site recycled water plant is in place. Water Program E is with the recycled water plant in place. Now, I keep saying wastewater treatment, but what will actually happen is wastewater will go through the plant. It will go through what's called a scalping plant. Wastewater will go through its primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment, just like wastewater does now from Brisbane, by SFPUC, but there will be water diverted to create recycled water for use on the Baylands. But it's not a wastewater treatment plant that will have outfall or effluent going into the lagoon, the bay, or so on. Sewage effluent will continue going through the SFPUC system. Public services. This is section 4L. Here is one of those places that we talked about earlier. One of the issues in CEQA, one of the limitations in CEQA, is that CEQA deals with physical impacts and not socioeconomic impacts. So when we deal with police services, fire services, public schools, and libraries, the EIR is addressing the physical impacts related to the need and construction of those facilities, as opposed to police staffing, fire staffing, staffing of schools, libraries, so on. So as you read, here are the Appendix G in CEQA, which is Appendix G of the state guidelines, what you will see, and you'll see the same in the document, that the significance criteria are based on substantial adverse physical impacts related to the need to provide police facilities, fire facilities, classroom space, and library space. We'll talk about how you have to analyze number of calls, what's needed, performance standards to get to that, but the EIR is addressing physical need. The actual staffing and how you get staffing and maintain staffing is part of the planning review that would be done. So the basic mitigation measures in relation to public services are a storefront police facility, physical facility that CEQA can say that mitigation is needed. We'll talk about what that means in terms of number of beats in the city. Reservation of an elementary, middle school site in the community prepared plan. And we'll talk about why a reservation of a site would be necessary for a plan that has no residential, because under state law, there's an alternate way of registering your kids for school. The last mitigation is a requirement for provision of a library facility for the developer in the developer-sponsored plan where there is residential development. So what was done in looking at police services is to look at how many calls Brisbane Police Department gets today, how many calls could be expected based on service population, number of people, number of employees, and projected the number of calls. And what the police department determined was to maintain the service you have today, to mitigate the impact of site development. For the developer-sponsored plan, they would need one full-time school service officer, but they would also need to add 2 24/7 beats. Right now, your service comes with a single shift, and that would need to have 2 additional shifts, and then in the case of the event facility, additional officers. So 24/7 service is a lot more than just, if you think about, it's not just a policeman in a car, 3 a day, 24 hours, but there are support services, and you come out with a lot more officers than that just for one beat. For the community preferred plan or community prepared plan, again, the school service officer, because of the charter high school that's proposed, 1 24/7 beat, full-time, 7 days a week, and then an additional day shift, so just part of a day. One beat, one shift to keep one car going 24 hours, 7 days a week requires 5 officers. So you can then figure out, because you have vacations, you have changeover, you've got weekends, overtime, so yeah, it would be easy to say, oh, it takes 3, but the basic rule is 5 for one shift, and it'll require these shifts. In terms of fire performance is measured in terms basically of when you make a call, how quick does a fire engine get there? 2 different methods are used to determine those thresholds. One is used by the North County Fire Authority, which looks at what they call reflex time, from the time you call to the time the fire engine arrives. And there are basic standards for hitting 90% of the incidents. And the requirement then that's put in the EIR, the mitigation measure, we'll talk about how that, let me finish fire and then I'll go back to that. Fire containment, not spreading fire to another place, and then the ability of the first responder to get to a fire in time. Now, Insurance Services Office is what kind of fixes your insurance rates, and that's a rating of fire departments and fire safety done community by community across the nation. And basically, their standards to keep your fire insurance rates low, all development within 1.5 miles of a fire station. Okay, there's a fire station out right next to the Baylands. We're within 1.5 miles. But you also have mid-rise structures. And so the other part of the standard is within 2 miles of a ladder truck. So firemen can get to upper stories on buildings. They measure because just to say you're next to a fire station, you can actually overwhelm a single station depending on how many companies are there, how big it is, and so on. So their standard is travel time. The difference between travel time and reflex time is from the time the truck is dispatched, from the time it leaves the station to the time it arrives. And that's what their standards are for fire. Those together, what you will see in the EIR is an analysis of this is where the community is in terms of need for additional beats and shifts on the fire side, on the police side, as well as looking at how well is North County Fire Authority doing in meeting its current response times. And it's not meeting its current response time, so it doesn't take much to realize that at a lot of new development, you're going to have an issue. What the EIR calls for, because of that concern with physical facilities as opposed to staffing, is you will see you'll see as part of the impact analysis a reference to police facilities plans and a fire facilities plan. Those would come forward as part of the planning process to provide for expansion of the city's police department and a way of tying future development to availability of fire services that meet these standards. So that will really seek to look at the planning review to meet those non-physical mitigation measures. Public schools impacts. And the key in terms of school impacts is that the school districts have the sole responsibility and legal authority to solve school impacts. So responsibility for the provision of classrooms lies solely with the school districts. And what that means is you as a city cannot deny a project or condition a project on school facilities because you don't have control over them. That's not your area of responsibility. The way that the school analysis was done was to look at how many children would be generated per dwelling unit and how many students would be generated by commercial industrial uses. Because in the state of California, you can register your children for school based on where you live or where you work. Tells us something about California, how many people don't work where they live. But it was also a very convenient way for the state to say, aha, as we're going to institutionalize school fees, we can take fees not only from residential, but if we allow commercial industrial uses to generate students, then we can have them pay fees. And so in California, we look at both residential uses as well as commercial industrial uses generating school needs. The way this was done, well, my printout looks different than that. I was thinking, oh, something came out wrong. But the way this was done was to look at, first of all, what is the statewide average? Because school districts, when they adopt fee programs, should look at what is their actual on-site generation within their district. The local elementary school districts relied on the high school district and their fee study to create the elementary fee studies. And they used a statewide average. Well, given that statewide average, the amount of students was so far different than, for example, looking at Hunters Point and San Francisco Unified School District with generating those uses. So the statewide average just was based more on suburban model as opposed to an urban model. And so student generation for residential is based on the same numbers or the same generation factors used at Hunters Point, Candlestick Point. And then looking at commercial industrial, we looked at a series of different districts statewide, and they seem to have very similar student generation by square footage, and so that was used. Now, here is what is probably most important about schools, and that is there is a fee that is in state law to pay for each residential unit, and square footage of commercial industrial. Payment of the fee is by law mitigation in full for the school facilities. So that, and you will hear a lot of school districts say those fees don't build whole schools. And even if true, by law, a city may only require through CEQA the statutory fee. And that was done as a means of political deal, but it was the legislature raised fees and gave school districts the responsibility to build schools. So the city's responsibility and the city's legal authority ends with those school fees. The one thing that's a little bit different than that is that as we look at traffic, air quality, greenhouse gas, the schools and the operations of those schools are included in traffic impacts, air quality impacts, so on, because the operation of a school in place is something that the city can review as part of CEQA, just not the building of schools, because that falls with the school district. Recreation. We looked at two different major recreation issues. One is parks and recreational facilities. This is an analysis of, in relation to parks, increasing the use of existing parks in a way that would cause or accelerate physical deterioration of park facilities. The planning issue is how much parkland do we want? The CEQA issue is at what point do physical problems with our park facilities occur? And that deals with increased park demand using existing parks. It deals with the construction of new parks and recreation facilities. And that's the basic CEQA. Recognizing the location of the baylands in a major windsurfing area, the city has added an additional criteria, additional analysis regarding windsurfing resources, and the criteria there is degradation of the existing resource at Candlestick Point State Recreation Area. The way that was analyzed was kind of fun seeing, building a physical model of the project, graded, putting buildings on the site, running it through a wind tunnel, and watching how wind moved over the site, simulating the prevailing winds that you get here, and then destroying that very same model, taking all the buildings off, putting the ground back where it was, and then looking at how wind would go over the site without buildings. So that is the difference, and that's in one of the appendices, the detailed results of that windsurfing study. And in terms of mitigation, really the mitigation here is provided, it's the physical impacts of building facilities on historic resources, biology, so on. Now, I mentioned park standards. The difference between how much parkland do we want and at what point is there a physical problem. In the general plan is a park standard. There's also an open space standard. But in terms of parks, the general plan says as a community, we want 18.5 acres of parkland for every 1,000 people that live in the community. That's what we desire. In the municipal code, implementing a state law called the Quimby Act, the requirement, the minimum that must be dedicated to avoid the physical impact is 4.5 acres per 1,000 population. So what CEQA does is it says we must have, to avoid the physical impact on existing parks, the 4.5 acres per 1,000. And then as part of your planning review and consistency with the general plan standards, that will look at how do we achieve what we desire for our community, which is the 18.5 acres. So that's the CEQA review and the planning review. The other thing that we looked at, energy in section 4P, is the consumption of energy during project construction, how much energy gets used while the site is being built, and how much is used in the operation of the site once it's built with the normal traffic, building use, so on. And when you look at CEQA read the thresholds, this is a difficult term to get at, but large amounts of energy used in a wasteful manner. That's what CEQA tells us is the impact threshold. During construction, or large amounts used in a wasteful manner during from stationary sources, buildings, or mobile sources, vehicular travel. So basic mitigation measures, we'll look at differences in energy use in a second. One, looking at the energy efficiency during construction, because even the typical construction operation can use or consume less energy than it typically does. The city right now in its code requires large projects such as the Baylands to achieve building energy efficiency with at a LEED standard, which is a measurement tool for energy efficiency in buildings and other kinds of uses. But it right now requires meeting a silver standard. And given the large size of the project, the mitigation measure is calling for buildings within the site to meet a gold standard as opposed to silver standard. There's not a platinum, so it's silver or gold. What you will see in some mitigation measures in other communities is a requirement exceed Title 24 by such and such percent, which is very difficult to measure. So in this case, the standard, the mitigation standard, is the LEED gold. Outdoor lighting efficiency to maintain a dark night sky. Going back, and we'll talk a little bit about aesthetics in a minute, but looking at efficiency of outdoor night lighting. On-site renewable energy production, which is part of each of the scenarios. And then, as we talked about during traffic, air quality, greenhouse gas methods of reducing vehicular travel. So the next graphic shows a comparison of energy use. And because the scales are so different, megawatt hours, hundreds of millions of cubic feet of energy, what we did in this chart is show if we assume the developer-sponsored plan equals 1. We looked at a comparison of diesel fuel usage of all 4 scenarios. And what you will see is that the community prepared plans will use more diesel than will the developer-sponsored plan. Similar for gasoline, for all the same reasons we talked about in relation to vehicular travel and greenhouse gas usage. But then if you look at the flip side of this, which is building usage, electricity, how much electricity does each scenario use? You see an opposite trend, which is that the community prepared plans use substantially less energy for electricity than do the developer-sponsored plan scenarios. And even more pronounced is the reduction in natural gas usage. Okay, we'll talk about aesthetics, section 4A. This is one of those places in CEQA that CEQA practitioners probably find one of our least favorite sections to try and write and deal with. And the reason for that is, while we are told, and we have it hammered into us from the time we're right out of school, CEQA deals with physical impacts and physical impacts only. You have state thresholds that talk about aesthetics. and take you right out of, in some ways, physical impacts and make it some very difficult kinds of analyses. And so I've seen EIRs that deal with, is this going to be pretty? Well, find 10 people, look at a potential building, and you're going to get at least 8 different opinions. And so what we have done is followed the state thresholds out of Appendix G closely. And so 2 basic issues we'll look at. One are issues related to scenic resources and having to define what is a scenic resource, and then light and glare. So the basic significance criteria, and you'll see we try to stay with the physical impacts, and then you'll see also where it gets right on the edge. Substantial adverse effect on a scenic vista. Views from the, and I refer to, the hills of Brisbane. To me, it's a cove separated from the rest of the Bay Area, but in Brisbane, looking out over the Baylands at San Francisco Bay, that is a scenic vista. Views of San Bruno Mountain, that is a scenic vista. So the question is, to what extent, from a series of different vantage points, will looking out over the project site block views of those scenic vistas, block those scenic vistas? That is a physical impact. Do we like what we see? Do we not like what we see? That is not what's addressed in CEQA. The second issue is damaging, second criteria, damaging scenic resources. Will we damage a scenic resource? And you can picture scenic resource being, in some cases, rock outcrops, heritage trees, in our case, historic resources on the Baylands. Will the project substantially damage those scenic resources? And here's where we start running on the edge of physical impacts. A threshold that says, will the project substantially degrade the existing visual character or quality of the site and its surroundings? Degrade the visual quality. Matching that with a physical impact. Not easy to do, but what CEQA, where CEQA sends us is to look at compatibility of density of project. Are there architectural controls? Are there design guidelines? Is there some semblance of compatibility with, or is there compatibility with existing development in terms of density and design? What I got hit with the other night after the meeting was, how could we possibly find in this document that building that much, and this is almost the tone I got hit with it, that much development could possibly have a less than significant impact on aesthetic character? Because the question that came up was not the CEQA question of land use compatibility, but the planning question of this amount of development fitting into a community that has that amount of development, and how does that fit? CEQA is not going to give you an answer along those lines. That is part of the planning review. And the question that may come up is, so what are the hooks, for lack of a better word, but where are the leverage points in that planning review to deal with some of these aesthetic issues? That is where you look at your existing general plan, the policies of your plan, and how do they apply to the project. And so, as you remember when we talked about land use, there are inconsistencies between project site development as proposed and the general plan. The mitigation measures in the EIR say resolve the inconsistency, which can be done by modifying the policy as is proposed with that general plan amendment, or modifying the project. And so this is where the Planning Commission comes in. One of the things you will be asked to do is, based on what your general plan says, public input, planning review, as you look at what is in our best interest as a community, you will be asked to make a resolution of that planning issue at the same time you're looking at a project approval and being asked to certify an EIR addressing the CEQA issues. All that goes as a recommendation to the City Council. So that's those two different reviews and the way that they will ultimately fit together. So I mentioned the viewpoint locations, and there is a map in there of the viewpoint locations that are shown in red, each one looking at a view over the Baylands. One of the things that you will see is there is a comparison of three views on each page. One is existing, a photograph taken, this is what you see now, a photograph with a model of buildings as they could be developed under this specific plan, looking at maximum amount of building bulk that could be put on the site as is proposed, and the buildings in the model are just pure white buildings. And while you might say, gee, that isn't really accurate because we aren't going to get pure white buildings, the reason it's done that way is to get out from under the interpretation of, do the buildings look good or not good? Because remember, we're looking at the physical impact of blocking a view, not the architectural design. And so what you will see in some cases is a solid mass of white, which represents building area. The reality is it would be a series of different buildings. But you're looking at those viewpoints to look at blockage of views. And so the mitigation measure that you will see there is, particularly in terms of blocking views of the bay, is as development moves towards the east side of the site, setting a maximum height limit, pushing the buildings down so that you look out over the project site. Now, while that will solve or resolve, I can now see the bay because the mitigation measure will be effective in being able to view the bay. As part of that planning review is the mass of buildings, and mass is a planning term. It just means height, width. But the building mass out there, is that appropriate? That is part of the planning review, not the CEQA review. The last section, I think, that I'm going to talk about tonight will be historic resources. You'll see this as section 4D looking at, and that will be called cultural resources. Cultural resources is the broad term for archaeological resources, basically Native American resources prior to historic time of European settlement, historic resources from the time of European settlement on, paleontological resources, whale bones, prehistoric resources dating back prior to human occupation of the site. The basic criteria that are used, and this is probably one place where in state law there's more definitions and definition of significance. So an adverse change in the significance of a historic resource. So we have the roundhouse building out in the site, and impacts to the roundhouse can occur in two ways. One would be tearing down the roundhouse or just letting it to continue deteriorating till it's no longer a viable building is an impact on the historic significance of that resource. Putting buildings around it that are so different in scale or design so that the setting of the roundhouse looks as if here's this historic structure that now sits in a very modern setting, so you destroy the setting of a historic structure, that also is an impact. And I remembered years ago going to Boston, seeing Old North Church. Here's this historic structure dating back to the Revolutionary War, sitting in a modern neighborhood. That's an impact. Taking a historic resource like that, putting it in a setting inappropriate is an impact. And so you'll see mitigation measures that deal with eliminating or stabilizing, eliminating the potential for further deterioration, looking at architectural compatibility surrounding the roundhouse as well as the machinery and equipment building. And those are based on criteria used by the Department of Interior, the Secretary of Interior, so there are basic standards that are used to determine how you protect the setting. Archaeological resources are also part of this. Destroying an archaeological resource, changing its significance, would be a significant impact. And in this case, on this site, so much has been disturbed in the past with the landfill, as well as the railroad, the rail yard, that we're not going to find archaeological resources at the surface as you might in more natural settings, but particularly on the rail yard site, as grading occurs, there is the possibility of digging up artifacts beneath the surface, and that would be a significant impact. So we're dealing with not a known impact, but the contingency that an impact of digging up previously unknown resources would occur. Same with paleontological resources. And then, and this is one thing that we also talk about in CEQA, compliance with the law is not mitigation, so that development is required to comply with the law. Therefore, we have to assume that the project complies with the law. But what happens if you dig up human skeletal remains? There is a very specific set of standards in state law of dealing with that, called the coroner. The coroner figures out what it is. Is it historic? Is it a crime scene, or is it a historic resource? But it is included in CEQA as a threshold, so we've analyzed that. The mitigation is compliance with the law. So next steps. We're going to have one more presentation. That will be Thursday night. And we'll deal with hazards and hazardous materials, contamination on site, geology, soils, and seismicity, surface water hydrology. And the reason the hydrology section will deal with surface water is because of contamination, groundwater is dealt with as part of hazards and hazardous materials. We'll deal with the biology of the site in that section, and then talk about growth inducement, cumulative impacts, this project in relation to development in the surrounding area, and then as a summary, issues related to sustainability. And as you heard at the beginning, there will be public meetings held in September to take verbal comment on the draft DEIR. Written comments need to be received before October 8th. You do not need to feel required to submit them on October 8th, but they will be accepted up through October 8th, 120-day review period. Then what will happen is there will be written responses prepared for all comments that are received, both those in writing and at the September meetings. And after that's prepared, that will all be assembled in what's called a final EIR with, if we need clarification of issues and analysis that's included in the EIR, in the draft EIR, that will be done, packaged into what's called a final EIR, and only then will the Planning Commission be able to hold public hearings on the project itself. And that becomes, we transition from talking about what are the impacts to what should we do with the project. That will occur after the close of the public review period. So with that, I will take any questions you have. And remember, questions right now looking at how do we go through the document as opposed to why did you do this? Because those are the kinds of comments that we need in the document. Why was it analyzed this way? Did you do this? So I'll try and help you with how to frame some of those questions. So where's our, oh, there you are. Great, any questions? Come on, I couldn't have done that good. Here we go. And we'll do it the same way. We'll take one question, go on, and we'll come back as many times as we have time for.
You said that you photographed,
the viewpoints. Let's go to the aesthetics one. And you photograph what you see now and the blockage of the views. But actually, did you photograph what you would have seen in 2010? Because that was the existing conditions at that time. Because one of my concerns is the view from Bay Shore, looking up at Brisbane, and that view is already substantially blocked over the last 4 years with the dirt piles. And sort of the same thing when you talked about the wind tunnel test for the Candlestick Point Recreation Area. Did you do the simulation based on 2010 conditions? And if so, how did you determine that? So how do we address those kinds of things if we, and is it clearly stated in there what conditions you used and what time frame you used for each of these?
Yeah, the dates of, and you should see this consistently throughout the document, so if you don't, these are the kinds of comments that we need. Anytime we're talking about an existing condition, a site survey, there should be a date put to it. So biological surveys were conducted on these dates, cultural resources surveys on these dates. There should be dates in there, and I'm drawing a blank right now, that will talk about when those photographs were taken, when the view sheds were analyzed. And so if you do not see those numbers in there, that's a comment that we need to get, that does that existing condition adequately or appropriately reflect the 2010 baseline? Yes. So we're making them walk all the way back up here. Right? Microphone's on the way.
We switched out.
Okay.
Another question on the viewpoints. I thought that the table you put in there was very helpful in showing the buildings. I was confused by what you said because, to me, those viewpoint photographs taken from the east side clearly indicate one of the standards that you wrote up there, a degradation of the view of the mountain from that area. And it just seemed like you were talking a lot about the views from Brisbane, but not so much from the freeway. I mean, it's just as valid from Candlestick Point or from the east side of the freeway as it is from the other side as well.
So that's one of the comments to get, and part of it is the vegetation that's in place blocking the view beyond that. So if you think, and if your conclusion after reading that analysis is the conclusion presented in the document does not accurately reflect the information provided, that is the kind of comment that we need on this, and then we'll take a look back at those kinds of things.
I have more questions, but should I go ahead or back?
Let's see. Any other questions? We're going to go back and forth up here. Oh, then we'll come back. We'll go here and then come right back to you. Okay.
You talked about the 20-year water supply versus the 50-year water supply. Could you clarify, is the 20-year water supply from the date of the EIR, draft EIR? Is it 20 years from the beginning of the build-out, the end of the build-out? Is it 20 years plus 20 years?
Yeah. The way that the water supply works is 20 years from opening day.
Opening day
Of the project. So it'd be first occupancy. But what has been analyzed, but we have a 50-year agreement, so you'll see at the build-out year, and then we know that for a period after that, for 30 years after that, there's water supply because of the 50-year agreement. So we'll come back up.
Well, it's just that we haven't finished building up the Northeast Ridge, and it's been over 30 years. So that's why this question is extremely relevant.
Yeah. The way that it looks at is not what is the actual rate of building, because that you don't know, but there is a presumed rate of building, and then analyzing the amount of, and in this case, 5-year increments, assuming total build out of the project in that 20-year period, and then looking at how much water is available and how much water is, what water demand is. So that if the project builds out at a slower rate, the water agreement would still make that amount of water available. And we had a question back here.
Well, I
first of all, was wondering about the status of the water transfer agreement, if that is 100% approved by all parties, or is there a schedule for that?
And this, what I'll say will actually be the same of each part of the project, and that is, when you say 100% approved, the parties, City of Brisbane, SFPUC, Oakdale Irrigation District, and then through Modesto Irrigation District, are precluded from a formal approval of that agreement until this whole CEQA process is completed. So the same thing I said about reviewing the project before it can go to the Planning Commission, before the City Council can make a formal approval of the agreement and have the mayor sign it, before Oakdale can do the same, or Modesto, or SFPUC, the CEQA process needs to be completed. Only then can you get formal approval. What exists today is a memorandum of understanding that lays out deal points. And that is, those deal points are the basis for analysis of the water supply agreement. Yeah, at this point, it's a memorandum of understanding between the parties, but no formal approval, nor can there be to the end of the process. And if anybody gets cold feet, I'm sure we'll hear about it by October 8th. Well, it's not so much a catch-22 as, one, there needs to be a proposal. There needs to be a project to analyze. And so what we have now is a project description that cannot be approved in the absence of the environmental analysis. Questions? There's one there, and then we'll keep working our way back up front.
There are several assumptions that you have been mentioning, presumptions. In the document itself, will those assumptions be disclosed what they're based on?
Yes.
Everyone?
They should be, and if you find one that isn't, those are the kinds of comments, because one of the things that we're looking at, that needs to be looked at under CEQA is the basis for determination explained. And so if there is an assumption that says we assume X, and there's no explanation of what it is, that's the kind of comment that we need, because that explanation needs to be there as to why that is valid.
Now, if some of the studies that the assumptions may be based on are updated during this time before the final EIR is approved, would that be something that could be inserted at that time?
Yeah, it depends on what's updated, but yeah, the reason that it's called a final EIR is it's not final until it's actually certified. So if there is new information that has a bearing on the analysis of impacts that comes up, that would need to be looked at as part of the final EIR. We're almost back up here.
My name is Brad Block. I'm a Brisbane resident, and actually speaking on behalf of the San Francisco Board Sailing Association. I'm the designated site steward for Candlestick Point, which is also known in your study as Windsurfer Circle. So I'm actually representing thousands of people, of board sailors who have used this area over the past 20 years. We have many, many questions about the study and the assumptions and methodology and so forth. And we, I guess, are strongly urging the city and the engineers that have done this study to meet with us and our organization separately to go over these questions, because right now we can't provide substantive comments with the level of detail that's present in this report. So following up to what this woman has pointed out, if we provide comments that there's missing detail, well, we need that detail to provide the comments. So we look forward to meeting with you, with the city, as soon as possible.
Okay. Yeah, and then the other thing to look at, because we've talked about what's in the EIR document, these 1,200 pages. In addition, and in the CD that's included with the EIRs, there are a series of appendices that have a series of documents about 4 times this size. And I think the windsurfing analysis is Appendix J or something like that. So, yeah, okay, good. There were questions up here.
Do you want to clear? That's fine.
You sure?
Yeah, I can wait.
I wondered if anyone had actually asked the Department of Water Resources about the water rights that Oakdale Irrigation District alleges. I understand that there's 50,000 acre feet that they say that they have a right to. But it seems to me, in order to, that needs to be verified, and not just because they said so. And also in the county that they're located, is there a history of litigation about those water rights that we're ignoring and just saying that we will have a right once they give it to us? I think those are important issues. And have you resolved those issues?
Yeah, a couple things. As you read that section, it referred to the water right. There was a review. Is there litigation on the water rights today? And there's not. Are the water rights challenged? How do they fit in time with other demands on the river? And these are the senior rights on the river. The Department of Water Resources is reviewing the document right now. That was part of the review of this. There was an EIR prepared, and you'll see the references to the EIR on the transfer agreements or the ability to transfer water that Oakdale Irrigation District had. So they went through a similar CEQA process regarding the ability to transfer, and it's the final EIR following Department of Water Resources comments that we're basing this on, and Department of Water Resources will have a whole other review. So, but if you want a specific check on that, that's the kind of comment to provide.
So you do not have a specific check on that?
We have a specific check from the document certified by the board, by their board following their review. Following review by
Board
Department
of
of Water
Resources.
Resources. Right.
Department.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll come back there. We're going to go across there and back that way.
So, I'm wondering if you can give me, I have two questions. First, I want to apologize actually to the community for referring to the CPP as the community preferred plan last time, and it's not the community prepared plan, and I apologize. The second thing is, I was wondering if you can give us some sort of guidelines as to where we can expect to find explanations, because I just don't think as a community we can all get through the 4 things. So I don't know, I'm wondering if you can sort of give us some broad guidance, because there's a lot of things that I'm coming across, a lot of assumptions, and I'm like, okay, well, am I just not getting to that part yet? Or am I going to have to go and read those 4 binders of appendices? Or is it just not even there? Is it just one of those unconsciously made assumptions that nobody realizes they made an assumption? And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that issue. And I know I've given you a very broad, obtuse question, but in whatever you can say would be helpful.
Yeah. Generally, you see as assumptions are made regarding you see the assumption on a 15-year time frame to get to the recycled water plant in place. Generally, that assumption will be explained the first time it's used.
But if we don't see something right in there.
Then part of the comment is, what was the basis for that? And the written response may be, that is shown on page whatever. But those are the kinds of things we need. And it's difficult to try and use that same explanation over and over. So we tried to summarize it in some places. There are some, whether we call them assumptions or not, analyses that are based on like the models that are used. So there is a standard model that is used to analyze traffic, or a standard model that's used in the Bay Area to do that. If you're looking for additional detail on the assumptions used in those models and the inputs, those may be in the appendices, but that's, if you want them specified and not having to go through that, that would be the kind of comment to do. And so we would then have that information in response to the comment, and then you have that before public hearings would start, so you'd go back and check those Great, we had a question back here.
Hello, I attended a meeting in Sacramento of, I think it was the Department of Water Resources, and it was a large meeting. And the issue before the board was the minimum flows required in the Tuolumne and the other rivers. And the current minimum is something like 20%. And the argument and the debate was whether that needed to be raised to 35%, as the staff wanted to do, or 50%, as Fish and Wildlife and all the federal organizations wanted. Well, that means whichever is chosen, there's going to be less water drawn from those rivers. And so I guess my question is, can this agreement survive a large reduction in the total draws from the river?
That's exactly the kind of thing that would be written in a comment. Yeah. And yeah, but remember what CEQA is looking at is what is the baseline to the change in baseline. And so you get those kinds of comments about what may happen in terms of new legislation, changing rules, so on. And that becomes all part of that on the planning review side, part of the issues on what regulatory changes might occur that would affect this. So those are the kinds of comments to get to, and yeah. If it's reasonably foreseeable, the question was on cumulative impacts. We'll talk about cumulative impacts next time. And so part of the question, and I'll take a look at that before we get to Thursday night, is are there, and part of the comments, are there regulatory changes that should be reasonably foreseeable as part of that analysis of the project plus reasonably foreseeable projects? The project being what's proposed here.
Hi, I have a question about sort of some of the assumptions that you make, and are they clearly explained, especially if they're somewhat subjective? Because one of the things you said is that you've estimated the rate of building over 20 years, and yet last week you said the building rate was market-driven. And so how are you able to forecast that? Do you have a crystal ball that we should all know about to help us with market-driven housing and other buildings? And the same thing sort of situation is, why would you use an area of such different composition like Candlestick and Hunters Point than Brisbane or what was proposed or this area? I mean, the characterization of those areas is extremely different at all levels, both physically and socio-economically, than Brisbane and our surrounding areas. So I'm not sure why you would do that, and then why you would choose statewide over regional, over specifically regional. We're part of San Mateo County. This is the second highest median income county in the state of California, and you chose one of the very poorest areas of San Francisco to compare it to. So I'm not sure I understand why.
Okay. I'll give the second part, then you probably have to give me the first part again. The statewide average is very, very high in terms of this area. And so we did not use ultimately the statewide average for residential. Using the same generation factors as Hunters Point and Candlestick Point, if we assume that that is a lower economic group than what would occur here, that we would tend to overestimate the impact as opposed to taking a much smaller project or lower density project farther south in San Mateo County that may have lower generation. So that's the reason to comment on them, because in this case, the school districts, the elementary school districts, have not adopted their own generation factors. So in a case where a school district would do its own generation factors, that is exactly what we would use. But the choice that we had was
Statewide?
a statewide average that's going to take rural counties Because statewide average is exactly that. A statewide average would tell you that a dwelling unit anywhere in the state is going to average about a half a student per unit. And that would be averaging San Francisco with Beverly Hills, with Piedmont, with Oakland, Richmond,
Reading, Hollister, Wairika.
everywhere. City of Los Angeles, City of San Diego. So very urban, very rural, and what that tells you is average statewide, urban, rural, everything. So that doesn't get us there. That is why we used the numbers from the closest project. And as part of the comment, it's a fair comment to say that is not accurate because of the reasons you're giving, and then we will need to respond to that.
No kidding. Okay. Do you want me to ask another question, or does someone else have?
Go first this time.
Okay, thank you, Clara. So, I'm not sure if this is a legitimate question or not, according to your question rules, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. You have explained to us previously why the CPP is going to result in more gas usage, because there's going to be more trips because there's not residential, okay? Whether or not I agree with that, we'll set that aside. But I'm looking here at the diesel consumption, and the diesel consumption is also higher, but that can't possibly be because of the lack of residential, because, well, not too many people drive diesel cars. And I was just confused because with twice as much commercial in place, I would have thought that would have doubled the diesel number, because diesel is usually consumed by things like delivery trucks. And I'd appreciate it if you'd go ahead and explain to me some of the underlying assumptions, just for my benefit, just to assume that I'm never ever going to get to that appendices. And I know a lot of probably other people who are listening won't.
Yeah.
and might be thinking the same question.
One of the things I'm thinking may be happening is the 12 million square feet in the developer-sponsored plan is 12 million square feet of total building area. It is not 12 million square feet of non-residential use. So one of the things that pieces of clarification I think we need to make then is it's 4,000 dwelling units plus a certain amount of commercial area that then equals 12 million total. So that may make it a little bit easier. And I think that's one of the things that I'll make sure we do as part of we've already got these comments, so as part of the responses is making clear what is the non-residential square footage. Because that will be compared directly to that 7.7 million. The difficulty on the flip side is if you're trying to figure out how much total building area, that's the 12 million versus the 7 point something. So that's part of what we can look at there, I think, in terms of that diesel amount.
I thought that would have already been clearly stated.
It's shown in the tables, yeah. It will show the building square footages. I think when I just did a quick summary, I was focusing on amount of total building square footage as opposed to the two different comparisons.
Can you tell me what table that is?
That will be in the project description. It should be like the table 3.2 or 3. Yeah, there will be a series of tables. In the project description, it will show, there'll be two different ways that the project is described. One is in terms of acreages, the other is in terms of building square footages. So that will show up in the project description. Where'd our microphone go? Oh, there it is. Okay.
You went into, in the EIR, it discusses the program that you're going to use for saving water. The D and the E possibilities. And I think it's a physical impact if you're going to make a requirement of this kind of, that takes steps. And it's kind of, if you're going to require residents of a city to abide by a perhaps rather strict water saving plan with no option out, and then the rest of the city would not have to. Now, that's not going to sustain itself, and therefore there will be an impact on the residents of Brisbane because politics being what they are, the people who live in that area are going to say, well, why do we have to do this and they don't? We're paying the same rates. Why? So what I'm getting at is there will be an impact on the residents of Brisbane if you are going to require some residents to save water. Then eventually all residents will have to save in the same way, whether it's onerous or not. It's going to have, people usually want to have a equal pain. And so I guess I want you to comment on that because it isn't discussed, and yet it will be an impact on the residents of Brisbane who don't live in the project.
Okay. The CEQA requirement is to look at what is proposed within the Baylands. And so proposed within the Baylands is is use of recycled water that's not now available citywide, that after the project will not be available citywide. And so part of the analysis, so that the project and the changes in the project relate to water use within the project site. And the water recycling plant, the importation of water, are all part of the project. There is not part of the project that says this will be expanded citywide program. And in fact, the design of the system does not provide for or permit that to be expanded, so that it is a system designed for use of the Baylands and designed only for the Baylands. And that will be, as you read the growth inducement section, there will be an analysis of will the infrastructure built for the project create more growth outside by making infrastructure available. So the design of this water recycling plant does not provide the ability to expand citywide.
I'm not sure that that answers the question about the impact on the other residents, because what I'm asking about is water saving policies, which this is a policy with I'm trying to understand.
Okay, now it's the project as designed implements these series of water saving programs. The project proposes water savings program D moving to E. Those are not implementation of citywide policies that would be applied citywide, and the EIR is analyzing the project. The issue that you're raising is, gee, since it's a good issue or good use, recycled water, would we be required citywide? That is a policy issue ultimately of the city council as to what they would or would not do, but that would be a decision related to your citywide policies as opposed to an impact of the project.
I have more questions, but other people do too.
Right over here.
I have a question about the water reuse. Since I haven't read the whole document, what are the proposed reuses?
The recycled water would be used for irrigation purposes. State law has limitations on the use of recycled water. And so, no, it cannot be used. It cannot be put back in the drinking water supply. It needs to be a separate system. And so what you will see, you'll hear the term sometimes dual pipe systems. And if you look around in communities that have recycled water, you will see where you see some of the above ground piping and fire hydrants and so on. If you see the above ground pipe painted purple, That is recyclable, purple pipe.
Called purple, but it's pink.
I know. Whoever called it purple may have been colorblind, but it's called purple pipe. It's different shades of purple. It's an odd shade of purple, but the systems need to be separated, and so there are limitations on how it can be, even for irrigation, what irrigation uses it can be used for. It cannot be used for a community garden, for example, and the potential in some cases, depending on how much water there is even within residential units or within commercial buildings, having two different water supplies inside the building. So the sink would be potable water supply, meeting state law. The toilets would be recycled water supply. In this case, we're really looking at irrigation use. And that's described, the uses, as part of the project description.
Back to the water transfer. I am just curious if you can say anything about this, the mitigation measure for the impacts on the Hetch Hetchy habitat is that SFPUC will do studies to determine if more flow is needed. So is it possible that that mitigation measure would actually end up making it so that this water is not available?
Now, the issue is not the availability, would not make the water not available.
What if you found something that showed that you needed more water and it seems like it would be possible that they could say, we need all this water, like he was saying, kind of going on that. Like if they need another 15% of natural flows.
Yeah, the dam release issue is how fast or slow is water released from the dam prior to spring thaw. And so the need to release an additional 2,400 acre feet would mean they start releasing a couple days early, release more during a day, as opposed to affecting the availability of that 2,400 acre feet. I think the issue of how much water has to be released, how much has to flow, how much can be taken out is a different issue than the mitigation measure for that SFPUC is looking at. SFPUC, their mitigation measure and their program is based on the ability to continue moving the entire water supply that they are projecting to be moved, how to mitigate the impact while moving the entire amount into their system.
This is an extra amount that they had not previously. Was not previously, it's being taken away from that Hetch Hetchy. It's being taken away from that Hetch Hetchy flow. Yeah. It's supposedly from flow from, I guess, the Stanislaus.
Yeah.
So it's...
What happens is, I'll try and do this real simply, but follow that chart. The real simple way of looking at it is...
So I guess you're telling me the answer is no. There's no
correct.
way that you're not going to get the water. Or if I should do some more research on my own to try to figure that out.
Yeah, it is firm water supply. So the way that it comes is water is purchased from Oakdale Irrigation District, who gives a right to Modesto Irrigation District, who then and so the Modesto then takes water in a different place now that... Yeah, the only thing that changes is 2,400 acre feet of the total amount that SFPUC has to release from Hetch Hetchy increases by 2,400 acre feet, but that affects not the total amount that gets released prior to spring. It will affect the rate at which they do. So they'll have to either start a day or two early, or usually it will be a day or two early rather than increasing the amount. Yeah, water supply agreements are tough because it's not the physical water flowing from one place to another. Yes.
You talked about the North County Fire Authority not meeting its current response time. Could you explain, is that in Brisbane city limits or across the NCFA footprint?
Yeah, their standard says hitting 90%, the response standard over 90% of their calls, so they are not keeping it station by station.
So not Brisbane? over their entire.
Yeah, so they are missing it, because what will happen in a fire, in a fire, is they'll run the companies out from one station. Then if there's a call somewhere else, or a call from that to that same station, they need to take it from another
I
place.
understand
So the standard is a district-wide standard for them to be able to hit 90% of their calls district-wide. And it would only take sometimes one station to be off kilter to cause that to fall. Because partly what they're measuring is not just how's that station doing, it's how are we functioning as a system.
Okay, so our fate there is tied with the entire group.
Exactly.
And then you, could you explain what you meant by adequate landfill capacity?
Okay. What you'll see is landfill capacity of the landfills to which solid waste from the Baylands would go, could go, analyzed over the lifetime of those landfills. So how much capacity is there for each landfill that trash could go to now or in the future? What is their expected lifetime? How much solid waste is going to each of those landfills? And then what is the difference that adding solid waste from the site would make? We'll come back around there in a second.
Sure. So when you say, referring to my previous question, about the, and then you responded about the, square footage for the buildings, and you said table 3.2. I don't think we have a table 3.2. I'm assuming that means chapter 3?
Chapter 3. Yeah, the way, actually I should have done that. The way page numbering is done, so if you call out pages or tables, chapter 1, table 1-1, 1-2. Same for chapter 2 and 3. As you get into chapter 4, that's subdivided into 4.A-1, 4.B-1. So anything that says 3- will be chapter 3, which is the project description. Yes.
Hello. My name is John Christopher Burr, and I am proud to be a lifelong resident of Brisbane. I'm also an attorney at law, and I've lectured at UC Davis Law School on environmental justice and toxic racism. So I have a couple of concerns about this environmental impact report. Specifically, how many languages was this published in? Was it merely published in English, or were Pacific Island languages such as Samoan, Tagalog, or Chinese, Spanish? Because we have significant populations of these people around here within the area who will be impacted. And CEQA and the general plan laws both require opportunities for maximum public participation in the planning process. And CEQA, of course, is very much concerned with doing a proper job of fully disclosing all the issues and looking at the impacts and results. So my question is, how many languages?
Okay, let's get all your questions and I'll answer them.
Okay, well, that's the first question. Next question is, I noticed I didn't seem to see an index. A document of this size really should have an index. And it should also be made available in a machine-readable format, not just a PDF, so that somebody could search through the document using keywords, meaning that it should be available in WordPerfect or Word format. I don't think you may have done that. I certainly didn't see an index. And the reason, why is that important to me? Well, for example, today I talked with a member of the Golden Gate Audubon Society.
Hey, before you go too far, tonight is for questions. Those are the kinds of comments that we
wait a
reserve
second.
the nights
Let me
in
finish.
September for.
I'll finish quickly if you just don't interrupt. I talked to a woman from the Golden Gate Audubon Society who said today she personally has seen clapper rails down there, which are an endangered species. So I looked at the EIR and I wanted to find, did they look at that? Did they find clapper rails, and what kind of mitigation might be available for the clapper rails? But, the document is thick and there's no index, and I wasn't able to go right to the clapper rail answer, whether you looked at it or didn't, or failed to. And lastly, it seems to me that, there's been a really, an attempt to use, I don't know, propaganda in order to minimize the amount of toxins that are out there. I personally witnessed giant tire mounds which contain vinyl chloride. Dr. G. Fred Lee, who is an expert on this matter, said it will be toxic forever. Forever. And as recently as last week, Dr. Beverly Pagan, who was a doctor associated with the Love Canal, said that there are toxins out there that are way above the Love Canal standards, which cause cancer clusters in New York. So that was a tragedy. And, I don't see anything in here dealing with that. There's a book out called Deceit and Deception by a couple of gentlemen. They talk about
Again,
what the
we're
lead
getting to
industry has done.
testimony, so
And,
if you have a question, I'd be glad
well,
to.
how many car batteries are out there? What's the criteria for looking at the toxins? Are we looking at the weak California laws, the very weak federal laws? Or are we looking at something more stringent, such as the European Union uses, called the REACH law, which is the most comprehensive and best reviewed, peer-reviewed, scientific-based, health-based toxics law in the world? Are we using that here, or are we using the weak laws? Thank you.
Okay. Get to the answers. The document was published in English. Only English. The document was published in English. If, part of the comments, you would write back. Go ahead. Yeah. In terms of index, it does not. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Those are the comments to put in writing and send in, or to come in September when we do that. Okay. In terms of machine readable, there is a PDF. It can be searched for words, for phrases. Whether you think that's adequate or not is your right to believe, but that you asked, how is it done? I answered the question. So you could search clapper rail, you could search any term, and if it's in this document, that CD is in there. And in terms of the discussion of hazardous materials, that will be on the agenda for Thursday night, and we can go through some of those issues then. So,
Can you make it available in WordPerfect, in Word format?
The document is now available in PDF version and written version and text. You can ask that. You can ask that question. You have asked that question, and the document is now available in this format. It will be considered, but that is all I can guarantee right now.
In Word or WordPerfect format, which you originally proposed it.
Well, this really is, John, this is now the end of the session 3, and the next session will be on Thursday night. And again, we thank you all for coming, and we will look forward to again hearing. And the next one's on the environmental toxins, is that correct?
Well, it's already looking like an environmental justice.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And if you have more questions, then please come up and talk with. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.